In 1921, two brothers named Theodore and Milton Deutschman opened a small ham radio equipment store in downtown Boston with just $500. They called it RadioShack, and for nearly a century, this little company would become America's electronics playground, surviving the Great Depression, 2 world wars, the rise of television, the birth of personal computing, and the dawn of the internet age. RadioShack didn't just witness the technological revolution, it helped create it. The company trained generations of electronics enthusiasts, employed future tech legends, and at its peak, operated over 7,000 stores across America, making it impossible to drive more than a few miles without seeing that familiar red and white sign. But in 2015, after 94 years of continuous operation, RadioShack filed for bankruptcy and effectively disappeared from American retail. This isn't just another story about creative destruction or changing consumer habits. This is the story of how one CEO's radical transformation strategy took a beloved American institution and drove it straight into the ground, destroying nearly a century of tech heritage in less than 5 years. The Deutschman brothers started RadioShack to serve Boston's growing community of amateur radio operators, or hams as they called themselves. These early electronics enthusiasts needed specialized components, vacuum tubes, resistors, capacitors, and other parts that simply weren't available in regular stores. RadioShack became their headquarters, staffed by people who actually understood the technology they were selling. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, most retailers were closing their doors, but RadioShack's specialized niche kept them alive. Ham radio operators still needed their equipment, and the brothers had built such strong relationships with their customers that loyalty carried them through the worst economic disaster in American history. By the 1940s, they had expanded beyond Boston and were operating a small chain of stores throughout New England, each one packed with the latest electronic components and staffed by genuine electronics experts who could help customers build everything from radio transmitters to early television sets. The real transformation began in 1963 when Charles Tandy, a leather goods magnate from Texas, acquired RadioShack for $300,000. Tandy looked at this small chain of electronic stores and saw something nobody else did: the future of American retail. While other companies were focused on selling finished products, Tandy understood that electronics was becoming democratized, and regular people would soon want to build, modify, and repair their own devices. Under his leadership, RadioShack exploded across America, growing from 9 stores in 1963 to over 3,000 by 1975. Tandy's genius wasn't just expansion, it was positioning. He placed RadioShack stores in small towns and suburban strip malls where nobody else was selling electronics, making RadioShack the only game in town for anyone interested in technology. The company's slogan became, "You've got questions, we've got answers." And incredibly, that was actually true. RadioShack employees were trained to understand electronics, not just sell products. What made RadioShack special during its golden years wasn't just convenience, it was culture. The company created America's first widespread network of retail electronics education. Walk into any RadioShack in the 1970s or 1980s, and you'd find employees who could explain how a transistor worked, help you design a simple circuit, or recommend exactly the right component for your project. The stores were workshops disguised as retail outlets, filled with drawers of components organized by precise specifications, walls of technical manuals, and employees who genuinely loved electronics. Future tech legends cut their teeth at RadioShack. Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, regularly shopped at RadioShack for components he used in early Apple computers. Countless engineers, technicians, and inventors got their start browsing RadioShack's aisles, learning how electronics worked by building circuits with parts they bought for pocket change. RadioShack wasn't just selling products, it was creating the human infrastructure for America's technological future. The 1980s and early 1990s represented RadioShack's absolute peak, when the company perfectly captured America's growing fascination with personal technology. RadioShack introduced millions of Americans to their first computer, the TRS-80, launched in 1977 for just $600 when competitors cost thousands. The TRS-80 became one of the first mass-market personal computers, and RadioShack stores became America's first computer retailers, complete with demonstration units and knowledgeable staff who could actually teach customers how to use them. Beyond computers, RadioShack dominated the emerging markets for portable electronics, wireless phones, and electronic toys. They sold police scanners, CB radios, early mobile phones, electronic games, and thousands of components for people who wanted to build their own devices. By 1999, RadioShack operated over 7,000 stores and generated over $4 billion in annual revenue. The company had become such a fixture of American life that RadioShack Run entered the language as shorthand for a quick trip to grab electronic parts or batteries. But success bred complacency, and by the late 1990s, RadioShack was losing its technological edge. The rise of the internet meant customers could research products before visiting stores, reducing their dependence on knowledgeable salespeople. Big box retailers like Best Buy and Circuit City began carrying many of the same consumer electronics RadioShack sold, often at lower prices and with better selection. Meanwhile, specialized online retailers were capturing the component and hobbyist markets that had been RadioShack's original foundation. The company's response was tragically predictable. Instead of doubling down on expertise and specialization, they began chasing mainstream consumer electronics, gradually transforming from electronics workshops into generic gadget stores. Store employees were increasingly focused on sales metrics rather than technical knowledge. The carefully organized component drawers were replaced with displays of mass-market electronics. RadioShack was slowly abandoning everything that made it unique, becoming just another electronics retailer in an increasingly crowded field. Enter Julian Day, who became RadioShack's CEO in 2006 and immediately set about implementing what he called a radical transformation strategy. Day looked at RadioShack's 7,000 small-format stores and saw them as obsolete relics of a bygone era. His solution was to completely reinvent RadioShack as a sleek, modern wireless phone retailer that would compete directly with Verizon and AT&T stores. Day poured hundreds of millions of dollars into store renovations, replacing RadioShack's utilitarian electronics workshop aesthetic with glossy smartphone displays and modern fixtures. He negotiated exclusive deals with wireless carriers and pushed employees to focus almost entirely on high-margin phone and service contracts. Most devastatingly, Day systematically eliminated RadioShack's component and hobbyist inventory, the products that had sustained the company for 8 decades, and differentiated it from every other electronics retailer. Under Day's leadership, RadioShack stores became sterile phone shops that looked like every other wireless retailer in the mall. The transformation was a catastrophic failure that destroyed RadioShack's competitive advantages without creating new ones. Day's strategy ignored a fundamental reality. RadioShack's 7,000 locations were profitable precisely because they served markets and customers that larger retailers couldn't efficiently reach. RadioShack's small-town and suburban locations thrived by being the local electronics expert, the place you went when you needed a specific component or had a technical question. By transforming these stores into generic phone shops, Day put RadioShack in direct competition with larger, better-funded retailers who could offer better selection, lower prices, and more attractive store environments. Worse, the transformation alienated RadioShack's most loyal customers, electronics enthusiasts and professionals who had been shopping there for decades. These customers didn't just buy products, they were evangelists who recommended RadioShack to others and drove consistent traffic to stores. When RadioShack stopped serving their needs, they took their business to online retailers like DigiKey and Mouser Electronics, who offered better selection and technical support than RadioShack's transformed stores ever could. Day's financial management was equally destructive. The massive store renovation costs, combined with declining sales, put enormous pressure on RadioShack's balance sheet. Day responded by closing hundreds of stores and laying off thousands of employees, but he continued pursuing the failed wireless strategy even as losses mounted. By 2011, RadioShack was burning through cash and struggling to pay suppliers. Day was finally forced out in 2013, but the damage was irreversible. His successor, Joseph Magnacca, attempted to restore some of RadioShack's electronics focus, but it was far too late. The supply relationships had been destroyed, the knowledgeable employees had been fired, and the loyal customers had found alternative suppliers. RadioShack had become a company without an identity, trying to be everything to everyone while excelling at nothing. The wireless strategy had failed completely. Customers saw no reason to buy phones from RadioShack when they could get better service and selection at dedicated carrier stores or big box retailers. The end came swiftly and mercilessly. In 2015, after burning through hundreds of millions of dollars and failing to find a viable business model, RadioShack filed for bankruptcy and closed over 5,000 stores. The company that had survived the Great Depression, introduced millions of Americans to personal computers, and trained generations of electronics enthusiasts, was gone, destroyed not by changing technology or shifting consumer preferences, but by a CEO who fundamentally misunderstood what made RadioShack valuable. Julian Day's transformation strategy had accomplished something that 90 years of technological change, economic upheaval, and competitive pressure couldn't. It killed RadioShack. Today, a few dozen RadioShack stores still exist under different ownership, but they're pale shadows of the original, selling generic electronics and wireless accessories without any of the expertise or community that made RadioShack special. The real tragedy isn't just that RadioShack died, but how it died. Not as a victim of inevitable progress, but as a casualty of spectacularly bad leadership that destroyed nearly a century of accumulated trust, expertise, and brand equity in pursuit of a transformation strategy that was doomed from the start. RadioShack's collapse stands as one of the most complete and unnecessary destructions of value in American retail history. A cautionary tale of what happens when leaders abandon everything that makes their company unique in pursuit of trends they don't understand.